Hello, my name is Father Timothy Tighe, and this is our 164th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, and I thank you so much for joining us on this journey. We go to our screen and we see the theme, love versus law in Deuteronomy as adopted by the Pharisees, and love versus law as defined by priests in Numbers and Leviticus as adopted by the Sadducees. What does this all mean? We go to our next screen and we read, as believers migrated from Israel, these are the Christians, Jesus' way of love more and more fulfilled their Old Testament expectations. Jesus' way of love made most sense. It was making a lot of sense to them, but especially when believers could integrate the prophets' emphasis on opening hearts to God into the teachings of the second law, the scroll most taught by the Pharisees. The other word for second law is Deuteronomy. That's what it means in Greek. Deutero, second, nomos, law, is considered the scroll of Judaism. It's what the Pharisees used to save Judaism. We go on to our next screen. The prophets used edgy, poetic words such as opening one's heart to God so the eyes of the heart might see and understand how God works. Legal words cannot give life without heartache. Israel needed to be free from the over-domesticated, suffocating life of Jerusalem to breathe the wilderness air and God's Spirit, both in the Babylonian exile and right after the destruction of Jerusalem. We go on to our next screen. The Babylonian exile is parallel to the church exile after the destruction of the temple. Before the Babylonian exile, the kings over-domesticated Judah. It couldn't breathe. Only free from Judah in Babylon were the scholars able to hear and be inspired. Inspired means breathed in by God to do God's work. During exile, the scholars who evolved later into Pharisees re-edited the second law, Deuteronomy, and wrote down on scrolls the oral teachings of the prophets. For they preached out to the people. They didn't write down their message. The second law editors tried to integrate the words of the prophets, especially open your hearts, into the words of the law, which they did especially in the Shema prayer, Deuteronomy 6:4. The exile priest, on the other hand, so you had two groups editing. The exile priest edited Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, and Leviticus to emphasize the duty of all exiles to establish the order and discipline of the Mosaic law in Babylon, for all suffered from exile's disorder. So they had to do their duty to bring order to their lives by following the Torah. The high priest rejected prophets' words about the heart. Didn't make sense. Do your duty and responsibility. The high priest, eventually the Sadducees, later in centuries, did bring order and discipline to the first ghetto, that's Babylon, through Torah. But their teaching tended to be heartless and lifeless. However, the lower priests were forerunners of doctors and nutritionists who used the law to truly help the sick, the poor, and the depressed. That's using the teachings in Leviticus and Numbers. So they did a great job. We go on to the next screen. Just as exiles in Babylon, Mark, Matthew, and Luke didn't write their Gospels till they were free. They were freed by exiles from Israel to edit the Gospels. Now, we need to examine the history of the second law, which began when a commentary on the law was found as Josiah, King Josiah, had the temple repaired. We read in 2 Kings 22:8, this is before the destruction of Jerusalem. Hilkiah said, I found the scroll of the law. Hearing this, King Josiah tore his garments and said, consult the Lord. And the Lord said, I want you to reform according to this document. The scroll found in 629 BC was an authentic old commentary on the Mosaic law, which we still have, Deuteronomy chapter 12 to 26. All right? And then Josiah starts the second law reform in 629, joined by Jeremiah in 627. But Josiah died in 609. We go on to our next screen. Jeremiah supported the reform till Josiah's death. Then he turned against it, for the people did not open their hearts to the Lord, which was said by Elijah and Elisha. Jeremiah emphasized receiving God's love. This is important. Do we receive love or give love? Jeremiah said, 4:4, be circumcised of the foreskin on your hearts. Let God's love cut through the calluses on your hearts. And even go further than that. Promote the welfare of Babylon. What, the people conquered us? Where I exiled you, yes. I will bring you back, for I have further plans. Israel resisted God's love, for it was passionate, painful love. Remember, the word passion comes from the word to suffer. But when you love deeply, it's passionate. And people are afraid of passionate love. We go on to our next screen. Jeremiah 31:2. Those who survive will find my grace in the wilderness. God is going to work through them, and they will hear it. I have loved you with an everlasting love, therefore I will be faithful. So God is there and will be faithful because he loves, and you have to experience that love. 31:31, I will make a new covenant with you. I will write it on your hearts. What does that mean? You will no longer be taught how to know God, for even the least will know. What does it mean to know God, to be in a life-giving oneness with him? And we can't explain it without words. The editors in Babylon, being teachers, framed the 12 to 26 chapters as Moses' last teaching. So this is the teaching he taught at the end of the 40 years. They added chapters 1 to 11 in the beginning and 8 at the end to make 34 chapters. We go on to our next screen. In Exodus, Moses receives the law as 40 years begins. Deuteronomy has Moses reminding the people 40 years later of his teaching just before he died. The editors tried to integrate Jeremiah's teaching on heart and love by focusing their commentary on the Shema prayer, Israel's favorite prayer. We go to our next screen. Now this is the Shema prayer. Deuteronomy 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. He alone is Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Keep the words of my command today on your heart. That's very important. Now, Shema's context, a legal context, implies that humans can love through willpower. Is that true? But love is difficult, even sterile, when in a context of obedience to legal commands. It doesn't go together. Receiving God's love is not emphasized, for love usually implies a surrender. So it's strange. We go on to our next screen. The second law misses the warm pain of Jeremiah's love. Remember how Jeremiah was talking about the anguish inside him? Deuteronomy 10:16 also quotes Jeremiah 4:4. Circumcise your hearts and no longer be stiff-necked. Allow God to cut through the calluses on your heart and let it warm you and fill you and soften you. The Lord will circumcise your heart so you may love the Lord with all your heart. Again, it's turned in legal terms and it loses something from Jeremiah. But when believers imagine Jesus on the cross, the passion cuts through to circumcise the heart. It opens believers' hearts to pour out God's love. Israelis were given a choice as they look back on the ruins of Jerusalem with the image of Jesus' crucifixion hanging over the city. So you can see this destruction with the crucifixion above it, almost like 9/11. We go on to our next screen. The Pharisees called Israel to repent and tried harder to love and take control of their lives by withdrawing into a ghetto free from ethnic evil. The apostles called Israel to repent, crucify their fears, open their hearts, and let God love them. Then go out and share your blessings with all nations. Thank you so much for joining us for this 164th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross.
I have called you and you are mine. I have loved you and you are mine.